Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
Malcolm.
Hello.
That is Malcolm Collins and Simone.
Greetings.
Awesome. All right. This is almost becoming like a Bayesian Conspiracy tradition where we have guests come back a few episodes later to dive deeper into various things that we didn't have time to get into, and also that listeners have been like, hey, why didn't you touch on this thing? You know, our answer is usually like, well, that wasn't the focus and we have limited time. Mm-hmm. Now we're coming back for some more things. So thank you guys both for coming again. You were previously on a few weeks ago to talk about the pronatalism movement.
Yes, and we were very excited to be joining you.
I figure since we've only got a little more than an hour, might be a good idea just to dive right into the stuff. And anyone who wants to catch up can go back and listen to that previous episode.
Let's do it.
Fantastic.
One of the first comments that we got, our listeners know me as, among other things, the guy who really hates death and wants to abolish it. Like, my blog of over a decade now is called Death is Bad. And it's not like a major focus of me. It's just sort of a background fact. At one point, Malcolm, you seemed very...
I am very pro-death.
Okay.
Death is great. Death is great.
What is up with you thinking death is great? And what my listeners wanted to know why I didn't push back. I can try to push back a little bit right here now.
We talk about this in a lot of our works. It's probably one of the core things, like alongside with our anti-mysticism perspective, is the pro-death perspective. That is.
Why do you want me to die, Malcolm?
Is a recurring theme. Well, because of the effects on human civilization if you don't.
What are these bad effects that I would have if I were to keep living?
So the core thing is, okay, if you create a society where people can start living forever, and I would point out, I am not against life extension or health extension, i.e. increasing the part of a normal human lifespan in which people are healthy. I am against radical life extension, i.e. living
Wait,
forever.
so what is 200 years okay with you then?
I'd say 200 years is probably fine. 500 years is probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
What's the big difference between 200 years and 500 years?
Well, actually, I can get to that. It's productive output years in an adult mind versus the deleterious effect of having no generational turnover.
Yeah.
So if we look historically at our species, you can see essentially, I think, like us becoming more philosophically sophisticated intergenerationally, but within a generation, generally after about the year, I'd say basically after somebody's about 25, maybe 30, they really stop having new ideas, like dramatic new ideas, and they stop being able to make huge changes in the way that they personally think. And when you have a ton of people like that living forever, just due to the nature of power accumulation, power is going to accumulate around the vampires, we call them. Like, if you have a society where some people have lived like a millennia just due to like, interest and stuff like that, they're just going to have astronomically more power in that civilizational structure. The way I put it when I'm being glib about it is, do you really want a civilization where the boomers rule forever? That's kind of horrifying when I think about it.
Well, it's kind of also what we're experiencing. We are being run by a gerontocracy now, and there are just too many adverse incentives for someone to keep things the way they are once they've accumulated nice stuff. I don't blame people for that. It's not them being evil, and we're not implying that people who want to live forever intend to conserve resources and maintain the status quo, but they'd be kind of crazy not to.
Yeah, people in positions of power intrinsically have a motivation to maintain the status quo because it is that status quo that has given that position of power. Really, the only saving grace humanity has is death and generational turnover. But then also what you even get if you achieve this end is fairly trivial. You're not really winning anything that important if you do win eternal life or extremely long life. And the reason is a human being that like what makes life worth living, I think, to me, is that I am improving and I am changing. All right. If in like 5,000 years, I haven't changed so much as a human being that I am unrecognizably different, and I am not particularly less probabilistically different than one of my distant descendants would be, then my continued existence didn't really mean anything because I didn't continue to evolve as a human being. And that's the problem with eternal life. Once you begin to look at extreme time periods, if you are actually changing as much as you should be for life to be worth living, at least from my perspective, you're not going to look that much different from your distant descendants.
All right. Wow. Okay. A whole bunch of things to unpack here. And I think that it probably would have been better if we had interrupted you as you went along so we could address them as they came up. I might be trying to do more of that as we go forward. The first part with the people like being ruled by the boomers and people not changing, I have two issues with that. The first one being that this is a skill issue. I have changed radically every decade of my life, maybe less radically in some decades than others, but I don't think of myself as the same person that I was in my 20s, and definitely not the same person I was in my early teens, and even have had a lot of change since my 30s. Like every decade has been a big shift. If people get stuck in their ways, then that's, first of all, that's not terrible, and second of all, that you can change your ways if you really want to, and maybe once we have the technology to not be deteriorating as we age anymore, we also will very likely have the ability to change our brain plasticity a bit, so we can make ourselves in more openness, more receptive.
I mean, we already do.
Can I reply to this before you go further? I think that when people say this, they're imagining their mental difference between like the age 20 and the age 40 or something like that. I actually think where the majority of the benefits if this change happens between the years 0 and 10. And when you raise kids, you really see this. Kids who are raised within an indifferent environmental and technological context see technology, the environment, and philosophy quite differently. And I can see this with my kids, growing up in the era of AI, for example. They relate to AI, I think, fundamentally different than any adult can. And I do not think you can have eternal life be meaningful unless you are regularly de-aging to like the age of a 4 or 5-year-old.
Maybe you would want to do that. Go ahead, Stephen.
Let's see. I'm in my mid-30s. I mean, so when I was a kid, I would leave the house and tell my mom, I'll be in touch by midday to let you know if I'll be home for dinner. And then I was just gone and no one knew where I was. And that was the last cohort of children in the developed world that happened to. And I didn't get a cell phone until I was in my teens. But I grew up playing video games, and my grandmother grew up in a house without electricity. Her house their place was late to the game. She's only 87 or 88. Yeah. But, she grew up in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. So, I mean, she's gone from no electricity to moon landing to AI. And, like my parents over the last decade, even just the last few years, have had what I would consider big monumental growth for themselves as people. And I agree. Like there's and like when Eneasz said that he's different from ages every decade, I was going to put an asterisk next to those first 10 years actually, that is the biggest developmental period, because you're going from I don't know what I'm looking at and I can't talk to developing concepts and being able to move and and all of the things that make a baby person for shorthand. That seems like a uniquely specific thing. And honestly, I don't know if that's, I mean, we could reset to that, as suggested, but I don't know if that's really where that's not the growth that like I really care about. Like, I'm glad I learned to read and walk and stuff between ages 0 and 10. But my biggest moments for like me as a person have come from teens, 20s, 30s, right?
Yeah, and I think that this is the difference in our perspectives, is you're thinking about this in terms of single individuals staying alive, where I'm thinking about the statistical inevitability of large groups of people staying alive, where I actually think that when we see changes of mindset intergenerationally, it's mostly happening because of the environment that they grew up in during those early years. And I'd also point out that even if a specific individual is capable of continuing to adapt to new ideas when they're older, I think it's just like really obvious to anyone who's being honest that if you look at large data sets, on average, people are less likely to adopt new ideas as they get older. And so if you make that older portion of the population a larger and larger portion of society, especially a larger and larger portion of the power holders in society, that's going to have a deleterious effect on that society as a whole. And so I guess what I'd ask you in exchange is, what's the benefit of living forever? Like, why is this a good thing?
I want to address that. That was my next thing. There's multiple benefits, both on the personal and societal level. You seem to be far more concerned about the societal thing, so I would like to tackle that first. The first thing being, usually killing people is the least good way to solve any particular problem. And people seem to keep always wanting to go back to, but if we killed the people that are a problem, everything would be better. And I really hate that answer, and I think it is disgustingly immoral. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you disgusting here. That position itself is extremely bad, in my opinion.
We could attack ideas. We're attacking ideas, not people
broadly,
here.
by the way. I think it's the ethical position. I think that most of the other things, we'll lock them up. We'll, freeze them. Everything else has the functional, same effect as killing them often. It's just more expensive.
Well, the fact that you aren't killing people, I think, is quite the bonus that outweighs that. And as in the fictional works of one Eliezer Yudkowsky, who never ceases to be fascinating in his fictional worlds at the very least, there's a society with immortality, but anyone above a certain age threshold, and it's not specified in the work, but I'm assuming it's at least 200, maybe 400 or 500, but anyone above a certain age threshold simply does not get any say in how a society is run anymore. They're there to advise, they're there to observe and to help, but in the terms of actually making the laws, they just have that power removed, similar to how minors cannot make laws or alter society. And that is a way to solve the problem that doesn't kill people.
Yeah, but it's one of those and of course communism works, on a societal level if you have this amazing governing body that doesn't become corrupt, but that just doesn't work in practice. Let's just stop being human then. Let's just become AI if we're going to do that, because then maybe we can actually be incorruptible.
This is the thing I mean when I'm like, what's the advantage? With AI today, if my distant descendants want to consult me for some aspect of my wisdom or perspective on reality, there's going to be AIs trained of me based on my podcast. They'll be able to ask questions that will provide answers within proximal percentage points of the answers I would have provided. So yeah, I mean, I understand where you're like, we could make it so that those who have been alive the longest don't have power in society. But to Simone's point, all of the sort of bureaucratic and institutional infrastructure is going to push that in the opposite direction, as those people will have a disproportionate amount of wealth and power.
I think this could be partially solved just by having an age cap on, you can't be president if you're under 35. You can't be president if you're over 100.
How's that going for us? Where's that age cap now?
Well, that's because we don't. That's because people are.
Is the gerontocracy going to implement that for us? Because that'd be great. I guess we should just have. Oh wait, Biden's really old. Oh, maybe if we elect. Oh wait, shit, Trump is really old too. Who's going to do that?
Totally, yeah. The debates that they're going to have, I think Trump said, let's have them standing up. That was the measure of
how long will they last?
Yeah.
And this actually gets me with my core difference because I've actually been going through.
Wait, hold on. Let me really quickly say that this is a new problem. Always before this, people were too infirm to be presidents at this age.
Well, because death, it's so good.
Yes. No. I agree with you. I'm not saying it's great. I'm saying that death did solve this problem before, and now it's not solving this problem. And actually, this is a great thing because now people aren't dying and declining. And yeah, it presents us a new problem, but we have multiple ways of fixing problems, and not all of them have to be death. So now that this is actually a problem,
but have you met
I think society recently? Is going to. Many people? No, I have met so many humans.
Oh my God.
The vast majority of the media is right now saying. Is saying these people are too old. Everyone knows they're too old. Why are they still running? And they're still running because we haven't run into this problem before. We don't have any laws yet. But now that it's becoming a problem, very well could be a thing that we start trying to solve in the next 10, 20 years. What do we do with people that are this old?
People never vote power away from themselves, and the older always have more power as a demographic within the society. And this is what gets me about recently this week. We have different holidays of the family, and the one recently has been Lemon Month. And I'm supposed to engage with an idea I find offensive. And one of the ideas I find offensive is AI apocalypticism. So I've been diving into it. I find it so intellectually unvalid. I find it offensive. Diving into a lot of Eliezer Yudkowsky's argumentational structures, it just hit me like a wall. I did not understand it before. I was like, how is he getting to these ends? And recently I understood one giant difference between him and I and how we approach problems is I immediately discount an idea if at scale it's unlikely to be implemented. So for example, if we're talking about AI apocalypticism and it's and then we could create a worldwide government that prevents anyone from further developing AI. I'm like, well, that's just not going to happen. Like, I cannot affect that happening within my lifetime. Therefore, I am going to discount that within the probabilistic pathways that I'm considering. And it's the same with this old people thing. Oh, well, we'll just make a law where somehow the old people in positions of power will vote that power away from themselves. And I just completely disclude that world because I see it as an impossible world to achieve from where I am today.
All right, putting in terms of we'll just make a law obviously makes it sound ridiculous because it won't be easy, but you are obviously historically wrong that people never vote power away from themselves. They did it in just the past couple centuries when men voted power away from themselves by giving women the vote. When white people voted power away from themselves by giving all the races in America the vote. Like, this is not a thing that hasn't happened before. It was hard fought, but people are often convinced by argumentation that actually, yeah, this would be better for everyone in society.
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with that. I guess where I'm looking at it is something like the current pension system, right? Like, I just do not see old people. I mean, what is the pension system really? Not the pension, Social Security, we call it in the United States, the Social Security system, and Medicaid. That is the older generation forcing the younger generation to work basically without remuneration or compensation to support them. Like, we have literally, I mean, you can say with slavery with extra steps, but that's really what it is. The vast majority of people born into our society are forced to work to support an idle and non-working gerontocracy, and I frankly see it as morbid.
I love my grandma. She hasn't worked in 20, maybe 25 years. I forget when she retired, maybe 20. But I think it's a mark of a good civilization that we take care of people who can't take care of themselves. And another major component of the too bad pro-life is taken. The anti-death stance is not just longer lives, but longer lives of productive years. If I live to be 500, I don't want the last 460 or 420 of them to be increasing stages of decrepitude, right? I want to live in a modestly healthy body for centuries.
I do have two other quick benefits of allowing the old people to continue existing. One of them being that every time you lose a human, you lose a huge amount of capital that we have invested as a society, and specifically like the people closest to you, your family, has invested into creating a valuable person. Just comparing the amount of things I know now to the amount of things I knew 15 years ago, like, it's no surprise that people in their teens are socialists and commies because you don't know better. It just makes sense. Whereas the older you get and the more things you learn, the more you're like, oh, I see all the little nuances and things that could go wrong. You become more experienced just in terms of pure skills, like, say, programming or chemistry or whatever. It takes so long to learn those up. You lose a ton of investment every time someone dies, and we shouldn't. And I know you're going to say AI can take over for that, but at that point, we're just arguing about replacing one species with another.
But again, you have to keep in mind the trade-offs. And we hear you on that. In fact, like with our company at one point, we had this thesis of let's just hire old people who have a lot of experience, people who are wiser than we are, people who know what they're doing, people from whom we can learn. We were thrilled about this idea because society overlooks them. And it's true that society overlooks them. And it's true that they have all this wisdom.
Overlooked them.
Like working society overlooks them. So we tried hiring. And in the end, unfortunately, none of them panned out at our company. And we ended up going to hiring 20-year-olds.
Well, they were entitled, lazy, and didn't like learning new things.
Yeah, it was more, I'm just not going to try that. That's just
You could be describing the 20-year-olds or the geriatrics in there. I'm not sure which one.
No. It is night and day. As much as we complain about the younger generation, the older generation, like boomers, are entitled and lazy compared to young people.
It's today. A different type of entitled and lazy. So the elderly person of today says, this is how I do it. They're entitled. I'm not going to do this your way. Gen Alpha, the Gen Z is like, oh, my anxiety disorder doesn't permit me to do this. I'm going to figure out a way to use AI to automate the entire thing without you knowing, and then spend the entire day playing video games, but still I get my job done somehow. And we love that. We freaking love that. Like, fine.
This is actually an interesting point that Simone is making here. The way that the younger generation is entitled is evolutionary. They are trying to create new ways of doing things. The way that the older generations are entitled is that they don't want to adapt newer ways of doing things. This is exactly why, like, we believe in this civilizational turnover idea. And I think one of the things that I've heard you argue, like when you're like, oh, I want to keep alive this person because I love them. And yes, they contribute nothing to society, but it's okay that, I doubt you're supporting her directly. It's collectively society supports her. And I think that that's a case of aesthetic morality. I think a lot of things in society are like aesthetically moral, but if you actually examine them by most moral frameworks, they no longer hold up as moral. Keeping somebody alive who is a drain on society and no longer really contributing other things but positive emotional reactions from their community, I don't know, like, if the alternative, and keep in mind, there is always an alternative. See, this is the thing. People are always thinking, well, it's the difference between supporting an old person and not supporting an old person and having that person die. Whereas I would say, well, if you look at the cost of supporting an old person, you could probably support 1 or 2 children at the same amount. And I would always rather be supporting the healthy development of a child than an old person who has entered sort of the parasitic stage of their life.
Yeah, but the fact that we choose to say these things is why we're never going to get elected. So thanks, Malcolm.
No, I
by the way, he's my campaign manager. He's my campaign manager.
When the revolution happens.
So I actually am entirely willing to concede and honestly maybe even agree with you that we don't need to support other people, that if you want to keep living, you get to support yourself. Or, if you have enough people that love you that they're willing to support you just to keep you around, that's fine too. That's your choice. Just like parents often support their children because they love these kids.
Oh yeah, I'm all about that.
I want to push back even on that. It's not just that I love my grandma, and I do help support her. Her Social Security, I think, is $800 and change a month, which in today's dollars is 10 days worth of resources, right? I mean, actually, she stretches it longer than that, but my point stands. It's not just like, oh, I want her alive. She has a good quality of life. She has friends. She has activities. She has a community.
Yeah.
And the idea that, well, she's no longer contributing to the economy. I mean, this seems to suggest that anybody who I don't usually get so impassioned, but you're attacking my dear old grandmother. So now it's personal. This seems to kind of run down all the way to the bottom of the Peter Singer slope of like, well, all right, then, the mentally infirm or the handicapped, well, they're not contributing either. If you hurt your back too much and you can no longer go to work, well, it's on our job to support you. You either find friends who will do it or you just starve to death. If you have a child with a developmental disability, well, they can't contribute to the economy. So either they are a drain on the family or the community, or we let them starve.
Yes.
That sounds
I think so
a
many
perversion
of the
of
moral laws we have in society are aesthetic moral laws that we make because we're thinking about single individuals instead of the counterfactual of a society where we didn't pearl clutch about these sorts of things. And I think that there's this belief that if we transition to this other form of society, that all these people are just going to randomly die on the streets. And I don't think that that's really what happens, but you have as cultural groups that end up specializing in these individuals. Here's a great example of this. What happened before the orphanages existed in the United States? Well, before that, you had the Shakers, and the Shakers would take most of the orphans. And it was an entire cultural structure optimized around funding, taking, and raising orphans. But because they didn't believe in sex and they didn't believe in having kids themselves, and that's how they stayed alive. Well, the Shakers ended up going extinct once we turned this into a government bureaucracy. And I think that the government bureaucracy system that we created as an alternative to it caused endlessly more harm to our society. So yeah,
I used to work at a place that would employ the mentally handicapped. Well, they brought in contractors to do like the most simple sort of menial labor stuff, and they felt good. They were useful. They didn't get paid very much, but it was more of a charity thing than anything. And then eventually, some sort of labor rights laws came in and said you can't employ people for this little money. And it's like, well, they literally do not have the skills to do something that's worth paying them for. And it's like, well, too bad. They just don't get to work then. And I think that really sucks because, there were groups that were like, yeah, these people don't make enough to live, but they contribute something and we help them. And that was nice.
I'd really love to hear, because you mentioned that you were going to address this, but I don't feel that you did. What is the value in living extremely long periods of time? Like, what is the value to society?
First of all, I am with you on the idea that if you are a drain, you don't necessarily get to keep living just because you're alive. You got to contribute something. Or again, if what you contribute is making other people feel good, that is actually also of value. There's a lot of people who do emotional labor or aesthetic labor or whatever. Like artists, all they do is make people feel good, and yet they get paid a lot for that sometimes. So you don't have to necessarily be like working in the mines to support yourself. Yeah, and I do think that a lot of the ability to learn new things is hormonal, and we could probably just create a drug that puts you more in the mental plasticity of youth. But
before we answer the question, I just wanted to point out that there's two different questions there. And then since I'm already stole the mic, I need to point out just I have been looking for the last years if I have like a sacred cow belief that this is something I believe for no good reason. And the fact that I'm emotionally charged on this is making me evaluate that this might be one of those cases. So I appreciate that. This will be interesting to reflect on. But just to point out the two different questions you asked is what's good about being alive? And then you said what's good about that for society. I want to make sure we answer those two questions differently.
Not about being alive. I agree being alive is good. But what's good about a specific human living a very long period of time at a like overall society perspective?
Well, that is my second answer, that society can get fucked sometimes. Like, I don't need to justify my existence to anybody. As long as I can produce the resources I need to keep myself alive, I don't have to answer to other people.
Yeah.
So someone to come along and say, well, you have to die now because you've been alive for too long, I take complete umbrage to that. And importantly, I would be just as upset if someone said my child has to die now because they're above 200 years old, or my lover, or my dad. Like, no, if we have the ability to let someone live forever and they can support themselves without being a parasite on the government, then yeah, that's just nakedly a good thing, because enjoying life is a good thing.
Quick side question before we go further. Do either of you guys have kids?
No, I don't.
No.
No. Okay. This is actually interesting. I wonder if this is a biological change that happens, because I talk about like as you age, the way you see and relate to reality changes. And when I think about the other pro-death advocates, like famously, Elon Musk has a very similar position to this that we do. And he has a lot of kids. And I didn't feel this way. I wanted to live for forever, basically. I was really pro that sort of stuff until I started to have 2 to 3 kids. And then it was just like, well, I just don't see the point of me living forever versus other people I could create.
And that's not universal. I wanted to die before kids.
You wanted to die before kids. So you don't think it's universal. But I wonder if it's a biological change where we're like coded to be like, oh, the next generation matters more when we've contributed to the next generation. And we don't feel that way. Because when I think about the radical life extensionists I don't know that many that have a lot of kids.
So this is possible. I've talked to a lot of people, though, and a lot of people with children are still radical life extensionists, and a lot of people with no children at all are not just like, I want there to be an end to life at some point, but some of them are like, nobody should live past 80. That's unnatural, despite the fact that they're completely, childless and single. But I think I think the more important aspect of all that was the thing that I have found more effective than anything else when I talk to pro-death people that have children. And this doesn't work as well for people who don't have children. So it's interesting that it only works very well with people who have children, is I ask them, do you want your child to die? And almost all of them will say no. And I'll be like, well, what if your child is 80? Do you want him to die? And they're like, no, I love my child. I don't want my child to ever die. And that tends to put things more in perspective for people.
I think it's a framing question. It's a poorly framed question. I mean, our kids are already excited about having kids of their own. They're already thinking about being grandparents themselves. We have a different family culture where we all expect death to be inevitable, and we all expect kids to be inevitable. And we see ourselves, a lot of it has to do with contextualization. We don't see ourselves as discrete units. We are not Malcolm. We are not Simone. We are one link in an unbroken chain that began with our first ancestors and will end hopefully millions of years from now. And our kids are being raised to view things the same way. So this concept of death also seems a little bit farcical to us. We die every given moment. I have a very ship of Theseus way of living. And I have this way of living because I've journaled extensively throughout my life. And I also write myself letters in the future that I open 5, 10, 15 years later.
That's awesome.
receiving these letters from the past, you're receiving a letter from a different person. And maybe this is also the way my memory works. Maybe a lot of other people experience their past a lot more vividly than I do. But I'm like, who the fuck is she? Like it's a very different person and a very different mindset. And it's helpful to receive these notes from myself in the past because I understand how much I've changed. Every night when I go to bed, I die a little bit and I wake up a little bit of a different person. So even within my own lifetime, I don't really see myself as a continuous consciousness or person. So the idea that even I am the same person, and then my kids, here's the thing is, why would I want even like some iterative version of me to exist in the future when I can take myself, combine myself with my number one favorite person in the entire world, Malcolm James Collins, make new people, give them the best possible upbringing I can possibly give them 18 years to experience all of our memes, all of our ways of life and values, and decide what they want to keep and throw away. So if I'm wrong, they'll hopefully be right, which is also amazing. Sometimes we're, even within our lives, even if we're very open with an expansive view of the world, we can't figure out how we're wrong, but our kids can. God, yes, they can. So to do that and then let them do that with their own kids, like, why would I not prefer that? Why would I not want to be replaced by that? It's better. It's like choosing to not have major software updates when you could have major software updates. I want a new OS.
I could use that analogy the other way, is that I think you can go through major software updates throughout your life, and that is sort of the ship of Theseus model. Like, I share very little in common with the me of 20 years ago, probably very few atoms and almost no memories.
But here's a question though. How much of a genetic determinist are you? Because Malcolm and I are also like very aware of the role that genetics play in different elements of who we are. That's something in the future, probably we'll be able to change some things, but you can't change everything. What about that element? Because I love the fact that I've been able to delete some of the things I really hate about myself by combining myself with Malcolm. And I see it in our kids.
What's that have to do with genetic determinism exactly?
Oh, I mean, just the fact that your DNA is going to determine a lot of things from, the level of acne you have to your risk of gum disease, various cancers, anxiety, brain fog, all sorts of things.
While you concede that you change a lot, you're never going to change your genes, at least not with current technology. And if you can change your genes, then what's the point of living forever when you could just have new people and they change their genes anyway?
I mean, you can always put in new people, but I want to keep on living. I want to keep experiencing things because I like experiencing things. And I don't want anyone else to be denied that opportunity if they want it as well.
There happens to be another person on Earth with my genetic sequence running around, and they have a different life than I do. I have an identical twin. I mean, we have different experiences, enjoyments, but again, similar levels probably of gum disease and acne or whatever. But I'm not quite grasping the relevance of that to living longer. Maybe this just comes down to and this gets to the most uninteresting parts of a philosophical question, which is you said 200 years is probably fine, 500 years probably isn't. So it's like, all right, well, let's find the number. Like that's pointless. But I like being alive, not just for the fact that I have people that I love and care about. I mean, that's a big part of it, but just it's conditionally different than not being alive. I enjoy the sunshine on my face, seeing colors and interacting with the world. I don't anticipate that changing over the next 500 or 5,000 years.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. So there's plenty of things that I like doing, right? That I understand. Like, there's plenty of people who I'd want to have sex with. And I know that, okay, I want to have sex with them, and that would make my life, better. But they don't want to have sex with me. And therefore, forcing this on them makes the world materially worse. If we live in a world where, for example, an elder person, is living off of Social Security, for example, that is taking money from other people to support someone, often against their consent, because we quote unquote live in a society or whatever, right? And it's the same with society more broadly. Just because I would on the margin prefer something. And I suppose this is for me, I only on the margin want to be alive. Like, I'm not going to love when I die, but I also don't really care that much. It's like, if I've done what I wanted to do, because when I'm, judging
our
my
position
life,
is that if you are okay with dying, then you are free to die. Like, we don't want to keep anyone alive. It just should be an option for people who would like to stay alive.
Right, but when I think about, like, why would somebody have that mindset? It's because the way that they relate to reality is structured fundamentally different from the way I relate to reality.
Is that so bad?
Well, it's bad if you let a bunch of those people around, the world gets worse. So, for example, if there was somebody who related to reality, anyone I want to have sex with, it's something I want, therefore I should get it in the moment, therefore I go out and have sex with them, regardless of whether or not they consent. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah.
So there are mindsets that, if adopted across a broad population, do make the world a worse place, do make society a worse place. And I think fear of death, we haven't had to live in or see a society where people can just act on that fear and be like, I don't have to die anymore. But we're going to enter a world where we do live in that society. And I think we'll see pretty quickly the way that the people who cling to life that fastidiously end up affecting a lot of negative externalities on the groups around them.
Well, and here's an analogy that might work for that, right? Because what you're talking about, I like being alive. I like the feeling. I like feeling the sun on my face. Totally legit, super legit, and very real. And most people feel that. You feel that because all of your ancestors also had a will to live, and they passed those genes on because they didn't lie down and die when things got hard because they wanted to live, which is pretty favorable from a continuing to survive standpoint. Now, the same happened with liking high calorie, high fat, high sugar foods, right? I mean, humans who liked those things on average in the past survived. Now, those people who have, sort of more overwhelming instincts on that front are becoming obese. 70% of Americans are overweight now. I think 60 something are obese, like in a very unhealthy way. Our concern is that society is going to go through a similar thing that the processed foods revolution has caused to human health, but on a societal level, making it a hell of a lot scarier. And something a hell of a lot scarier than the obesity epidemic is, it's a big deal. So again, there's a lot of things that we've evolved to want or think are morally good, like the concept of fairness, which you see in capuchin monkeys as well. This is not something that has anything to do with logic, really. It has to do with something that we evolved because it worked out well in various environments. Where there's a lot of collaboration. That doesn't mean it's inherently morally good. It means that it on average may have been associated with fitness in the past, but not necessarily in the future. So I also don't think we should equate things with moral goodness just because we want them or they feel good.
Sure. I can follow that. I guess that analogy makes more sense to me than jumping from enjoying sunshine to raping somebody. I think I missed the step there. But
well, because you don't consider those two things equivalent, but there are worlds
right.
in which sunshine is equivalent to rape.
Don't you want to go out and rape? Come on.
Sunshine rape. I mean, is there really a difference?
It's a beautiful day to rape.
The analogy doesn't quite stick for me, but I see the idea of what you're getting at of imposing a cost on other people. Again, I refer back to the idea that the idea isn't to be a social parasite for your last 400 years. It's to be a contributing member for your 450 of your 500 years or something. You guys, it's interesting. You guys enjoy being parents, I think, it seems like, because you have kids that you enjoy and are having more. I think you guys will probably enjoy being grandparents. I think that'll be a whole new adventure that'll be like exciting and something to look forward to. I think you guys would enjoy being great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. But even though I knew some of my great-grandparents, I never knew any of my great-great-grandparents.
Yeah, but eventually I need to trust that I've done a good enough job for the next generation that they'll do a better job than I did.
Yeah, and honestly, we have these conversations at night sometimes after a long day. And we're like, death is the reward at the end of this.
I can imagine living in a house with 4 grandkids.
Like our kids are well set up. Yeah. We feel, like there's a lot of release. There's a lot of peace in being like, all right, good run.
Maybe that is one of the other mental shifts that come in, is that once you're a parent and, exhausted by children, you just want to die.
You just want to lie down, die.
I think the older you are, the more accepting you are of death, because life quality is just worse.
It's not that we're miserable in life. It's that the human condition is difficult. It's difficult to be human. I hate having pores. I hate shitting. It's just ugh. And there's going to be AI versions of us that can hang out with our great grandkids, and I'm super cool with that. A lot of people are plagued by suffering. there are more antinatalists than there are pronatalists, and we think a lot of people experience that as well. So, there's also a lot to be said for letting go, having a go at life, playing the game, and then passing on the baton.
When the subjective experience of reality is its own reward, then it becomes quite trivial. As Simone always says, the only true contentment or happiness you will ever feel is effectively living your value system. When your value system is maximizing, whether that is temporally or through the level of happiness you're experiencing, your own subjective experience of reality, your level of contribution to reality is limited to your subjective experience. And I think that this is the point that she's making when she's like, death is the reward. Death is the reward because you lived the life as well lived as you could with the years that you were able to be a contributing member of society, with the humility to realize that
No, but the point is you can have a nearly unlimited number of years where you are a contributing member to society.
I just disagree strongly.
No, well, I guess then we have found our crux. I don't see any reason why someone who is in good health and energetic and able to change, that still has brain plasticity, couldn't continue to be a contributing member to society for millennia.
Because they only get one childhood. And that means that
so what? You don't contribute anything in your childhood.
You don't contribute anything in your childhood, but you form your world perspective in your childhood. And by living for millennia, they freeze reality, human civilization into a, from our perspective, primitive mindset. If people were still alive today who were in the medieval period during like the witch trials and all that, and they're like, well, you just don't understand. Like witch trials make sense every now and then, and maybe we should bring back the good old days. If people were...
I just think you're wrong.
Okay.
Some people may say that, obviously, but there's some people in their 20s today who say that we should bring back witch trials.
And there are people who in their 50s and 60s decide to become
the difference
vegans.
is that you think that because some people who grew up during the age of witch trials would change their mind, that is why we should have people live forever. And I agree. Some people would, but not most people. And because most people wouldn't, you would end up with a gerontocracy where old views of moral systems and stuff like that became frozen in place.
Yeah, I just don't think that's the case. I think it might be a slower to change things, but like I said, the trad life movement, biggest among people in their 20s, maybe 30s. This is not old people wanting to return to those old ways, because a lot of them remember how shitty they were. It's the new young people that look back with rose-colored glasses about how simple life was on the farm when you went to, Jesus building, church every Sunday. You can have regression with young people, and it's not the worst thing in the world to have some old people around saying, I was there for that time period and it wasn't great. I assume Stephen's grandmother actually thinks electricity is pretty cool despite growing up in a childhood without it.
She got it when she was a teenager. But I'm trying to think of anything else to dive into here. This is a really interesting conversation.
It is, but we're more than halfway through and we've only gotten through one bullet point.
Yeah, so we'll go to the next one.
If there's any last bits that you want to get on this topic, though, I don't want to cut it off prematurely. But if we do want to hit anything else, it might be time to.
We'll hit other things. I mean, I think people have heard our perspective and they know what it is.
It was really interesting and thought provoking. I'm looking forward to reading more about it on your guys' stuff. And
you can check out the evil of life extensionism. We have an episode where we go deep on this, but we've covered most of the topics on this episode.
Yeah, and if you want to celebrate one of our family holidays, like Malcolm said, Lemon Month, basically what you do is you choose the thing that offends you most in this world, and you do your best to steelman it for a month, and at the end you plant some kind of fruit tree or fruit-bearing plant and celebrate it. And we call it Lemon Month because, lemons, on the face of it, not so tasty. But, when you learn how to play with them better in the kitchen, you can make some really great dishes. So, yeah, that's... something you can play with now, and you kind of celebrated it with us without even knowing. So congratulations.
I appreciate being involved. I think that's a really fun tradition. Have you guys ever had a major position change after Lemon Month where you steelman something and then found it newly compelling?
We do get more nuance to the conversation. I think, Malcolm, your stance on turfs really changed.
Yeah, my stance on TERFs really changed.
Yeah.
Is I realize that when I approach something, often they are dealing with some sort of a different prior or a different logical structure, and I didn't appreciate that everyone within a certain movement was using a different logical optimization function, so it helps me emulate other people better.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. That's cool.
In which direction did it change, if you're willing to say that in public?
Oh, well, with the TERF movement, what I realized is for, and keep in mind, this was the early TERF movement. So we were standing the gender critical movement that just doesn't believe that there are differentiations between genders. And therefore, a man can never understand the lived experience of a woman in her childhood, which is different from the modern TERF movement because the TERF movement has changed in the last 10 years or so. But what I realized is that this movement grew out of early feminism, which came up during the period of like Skinner, and was based on psychology of that period, which is any human is broadly interchangeable with any other human. And we just don't they developed a philosophical relation to gender during a period that was different than our own. Actually, it's been very similar to the AI apocalypticism movement, where something I hadn't really appreciated about the AI apocalypticists like Eliezer Yudkowsky and stuff like that is that they developed their fears of AI before the transformer model and the other modern AI models became the dominant AI models. And so when they are terrified of AI, they are terrified of a general concept of AI instead of the specific way the AI that exists within our reality actually works. And I hadn't appreciated that before.
Huh.
Fun fact, the episode that is going to come out right before this one is exactly on that topic.
Oh, nice.
All right, I'm going to skip number 2 for now. I do want to loop back to it, but I think this next one will probably be pretty quick. More Births on Twitter recently posted a thing pointing out that it seems that low fertility is caused directly by high density, and therefore policy should favor low density. I heard from that noise that you disagree.
No, we have an episode of our podcast coming out about this. This has been researched a lot. It has an effect size of about 30%.
Mm-hmm.
It does affect fertility rates.
Mm-hmm.
It's just obviously not the main cause. Remember how I said, one of the things I find stupid is when people consider ideological pathways where they obviously won't have an effect. Somebody's like, you could have a 30% effect on fertility rates if you fix the housing crisis. And I'm like, what? First of all, how am I going to fix the housing crisis when I look at all of the entrenched and interested players? And so even if I fix this global, astronomical problem that has so many more immediate reasons to fix it, I only get a 30% bump in fertility rates when that's like the amount fertility rates are declining every decade. Like, it's silly. Like,
yeah,
okay. Anyway.
When we look at prenatalism, we're really focused on tractable problems. And there are so many people who are smarter and wealthier and more charismatic and better connected than we are, who are giving YIMBYism their full and utmost care and attention. And they are hitting brick walls in the tiniest of battles. We're like, why are we talking about this? We're not going to get there. We need to look at something we can do. And that's why we're so focused on culture, is on the family level. Anyone can make a difference that can have a logarithmic effect.
All right. There's more to unpack there, but I'm going to have to actually sit and think about that for a while, so no time to do it right here. Speaking of the culture things then, since we can segue from that directly into this thing from Kaneda, What Do You See on Reddit, says, I feel like the framing changed in a confusing way during the course of the episode. To start, it was doom and gloom. All these possible answers have been tried and found to make no difference. South Korea is a dead man walking, etc. But by the end, they would say stuff like, oh, it actually takes just a very small amount of people believing in a culture of children to turn this around. Our podcast already has enough listeners to indicate that 100 or more people strongly believe this and are with you guys. The culture is really easy to establish. The tide is turning on the narrative that children aren't rewarding. So is this still a problem?
No, Kaneda's right. It's still a problem, but also it's solved. It's a problem for the people who are deleting themselves. It's not a problem for the people who figured it out. The problem with demographic collapse, there are two problems that we're looking at here. One is cultural mass extinction. We are very concerned about the groups whose perspectives we'd love to see represented in the future who are actively deleting themselves. both, we'll say, sort of cultural groups. A lot of progressive technophilic people that we really like are culturally deleting themselves, but also South Koreans, Emiratis, Jains, Native Americans have incredibly low birth rates. And those cultures, more historical cultures as well, are going to disappear. So that's one problem. And that's tractable because if enough families from those cultures find a way to make their cultures intergenerationally durable and then therefore represented in the future, problem solved. The other problem with demographic collapse is a little bit different and doesn't actually require a change in birth rates. It requires a change in governance and institutions. And that's when we're talking about city infrastructure, the economy, governmental stability, because so much of these systems are predicated on population growth, continued population growth. And they're different problems. Both are tractable, both are solvable, but they're so serious. And right now, many cultural groups just are straight going kamikaze into the ground. And no government we know of is really adequately addressing or planning for demographic collapse.
I'll word this a little differently than Simone did. That may make more sense because I agree with everything she said. But it's more like we are Noah. Except instead of building a giant ark for everyone, we're going around and proselytizing that you guys need to build an ark because the flood's about to come. What she is hearing is us saying, well, everyone who agrees with us in building an ark is going to live after the flood. And I guess that's a good thing because the people who hate us aren't going to be around after the flood. Like that's one thing where it's like, that's a good thing. But that doesn't mean I need to stop proselytizing and being like, hey, the flood is coming if you do not participate in this thing that all of humanity used to know we were supposed to participate in, which is, intergenerationally keeping your cultural group alive, that you're not going to exist in the future. So our goal, like the goal of the movement largely is to convince as many and as diverse a population as possible to participate in this ark building project. But we are not going to stress out about the people who yell at us and are like, how dare you, you can't talk about this flood. The floods are offensive. And we're just like, fine, whatever, go away. We'll go to the next person. So it's a weird movement. We actually have an episode about this, which, God, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's like why it's low stress to be a pronatalist or something like that. But it's on this particular subject.
I don't want to fully open the previous can of worms, but which this may be a good wrap-up question, but it's coming to mind now. It's because talking about people deleting themselves through not reproducing, but what if they weren't deleting themselves through not dying? Like which outcome or which eventuality would you see as worse? Like one with heavy demographic collapse or one where people live to be 500 years old?
Much worse 500 years old because society is just not going to advance as much.
But it wouldn't collapse because those people would still be working and paying taxes and keeping the infrastructure running.
Right, they would. They'd be keeping our current society running. By the way, the episode I was thinking of is titled, Why Won't Our Critics Stop Destroying Themselves? The Innate Weirdness of Pronatalist Activism.
Our current society isn't that bad. It's got its issues, but we're not going around genociding people. Most people don't live in grinding pain and poverty. Is it that bad to keep society going rather than seeing it crash and burn?
Yes, it is. Because I believe that in 2-3 generations, they will view us the same way we view people from 2-3 generations before us, and the same way that people from 2-3 generations before us viewed people from 2-3 generations before them. We cannot imagine how backwards we are morally. We do not live at the moral nexus of history. And when I look at the march of history, whenever any population really looks at a population that's 2 or 3 generations before them, they're like, wow, they were really backward, savage people, and I'm glad we don't live in that era. This is why we always go back to The Martyrdom of Man by Winwood Reade that was written in the 1800s, and it has this amazing line where he goes, look, even the average Briton today lives a life that's better than the kings of the Anglo-Saxon period, but that was in part because the morals of society changed between those two sections. The ways that people philosophically related to reality changed between those two sections. And I think that we
Wait, so do you want to die because you don't think you can update your morals as society changes?
I don't think society as a whole can update its morals. I would be willing to sacrifice myself to ensure that our distant grandchildren can take society forwards instead of allowing it to be frozen in place. And when I say I'm not even making the sacrifice that my ancestors are making, because even if I cease to exist, my distant descendants can always call upon an AI of myself if they actually have any questions or any advice.
Yeah.
But that would all be like a pull, right? I don't want a push from people in society today, which is very different than the choice that anyone had in a historic context.
Wait, so either you would think that the future society is more moral and you can adapt your morals to, you can adopt their morality and become a better person, or you can think that actually the future society has gone a horrible wrong path, which I know you think some of the things that are changing in society are bad, and you do want to push against that so that they will not be more evil than the previous generations. How is dying helping anything in either case?
Well, if I'm wrong, if it turns out, like when I complain about groups, one of the things I'm complaining about is XYZ, and that leads to nihilism and low fertility. If it turns out that my hypothesis is wrong there, then that just shows that I am a crotchety old boomer, right? And I can't imagine how the next generation is going to solve things. And I am a net drain on the progress of humanity. Like
But people have a right to be wrong. I coexist with many religious people, despite the fact that God is a silly bedtime story, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, people do have the right to be wrong, but I myself don't have the right to subject a stasis on humanity.
I don't think you would be doing that as one person. You keep saying that like you don't have the ability to affect NIMBYism. Like, come on.
I'm talking about if this technology was broadly accessible.
I didn't mean to totally get us back on this track.
Right, we did. We should have. We should have not jumped into that.
Well, I guess the only reason it came up was because we talked about people who with desirable societal inclinations deleting themselves, whether through lack of reproduction or otherwise. And I was talking about the otherwise, but you're right. Maybe that was a bad call.
Okay. So one of the things this Noah's Ark that you're building it's a culture, and I want to ask about one of the planks that we briefly touched on in the last episode and never got into. In your research, you recently, like within the past few months, made a major change in your opinions when you discovered that almost the entirety of the fertility collapse is coming from people in their teens and 20s.
Yeah.
That people in their 30s or older are having the same amount of kids as they ever did. And this, I mean, at least to me, seems pretty obviously because it's impossible to have children and pursue a career. And a lot of people want a fulfilling career, a high-powered life, and they sacrifice children for that. And then once that is settled, once they are comfortable in life and have a good career, they're in their mid-30s. And then they start having kids, but at that point, fertility is collapsing. They have less than the 2.2 or whatever is needed. The thing that I brought up last episode is that this could be more easily solved if people with established careers were willing to marry people who are young and don't want big careers. Specifically for people in their 20s, to marry people in their 40s seems like a thing that has been done in the past to some decent effect, and you immediately dismiss that as culture would never accept such a thing. And I mean,
well,
sure.
Sorry, then it's interesting that I dismissed it that way, because that's not why I would dismiss it today.
Okay.
Or it's not why I think I would was my average level of knowledge. It would lead to horrible genetic outcomes. 40-year-old men actually are not as fertile as, like, male fertility declines at about the same rate as female fertility. It just doesn't have the same cliff. So I would actually say that this is one of those areas where life extension doesn't make sense. If we can, through science, extend people's fertility window, I think that would solve a lot of the issues we're having with fertility collapse.
Or in this scenario, Malcolm, what if the men froze their sperm and the couples did IVF?
I'd be pro that. That's awesome. Good idea.
Yeah.
I personally have sperm on ice.
So there you go.
And it is incredibly cheap to do. The main cultural problem being that people in their 20s pair off with other people in their 20s, and they aren't ready to have kids until they're in their mid-30s.
I will argue, though, that historically, and of course there are exceptions here, and you hear about them because often they're the bad to pay thing. Most people did marry others who were pretty close in age to them. It was not that common for a young woman to be married to a man in his 40s. Mm-hmm. I would just say, like, this isn't like the natural default. And we also are really against anything that was like natural or traditional or whatever, just because it happened a lot in the past.
I'd point out that, like, if this works, right, we are pro it, like because reality will be pro it, right? So if a listener of your podcast is a 20-year-old woman and is interested in you, she should send you an email, because if you can find, like, even if it doesn't work at a societal level, I mean, this is sort of the point of the pronatalist movement, is sort of irrelevant. If you can find the outliers in society who this does work for, and have a ton of kids and pass on this cultural practice, then it will be a major part in future humanity, and therefore it is good. And society will change. Maybe people in our generation will always look down on people who breed that way, but within a few generations, once it becomes culturally normalized, everyone will be like, oh yeah, obviously this is the best way to do things.
Well, alrighty. That feels like it's different from what we discussed last episode, but that was an interesting digression. I'm glad we went there. Okay, maybe the last thing depends on how quickly we can get through it. I'm going to ask this question, and then the answer is going to be for patrons only, so that there's some reason for people to give us money. But I think this is sort of a spicy one, and I really want to know more about this because you've mentioned it just offhand, dropped it once or twice, and never gone into further detail, at least in the channels that I follow you guys in.
I'm so intrigued.
Malcolm, you recently said that child support laws prevent wealthy, successful men from having children with poor women, but not in terms of like marrying them, because obviously that just doesn't stop them. So it's implied that from going to places where poor women are, having sex with them, and then moving on, now they don't do that because they're financially liable for those kids. And you said that this is bad. And I want to know, like, why this is bad, because I think I'm in the realm of agreeing with you, but it seems very counterintuitive, and I want to know what's going on here. For the answer to that question, as well as how the boys without fathers phenomenon is badly reported on, and why for the good of the human race we should all be having sex with the Amish, become a Patreon or Substack supporter. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us. This has been fantastic.
It's been great chatting with you. I hope people check us out at Basecamp, or they check out our books, the Pragmatist Guide series. But Basecamp, our podcast, is really, if you want to be socially, like, what is that word again? Parasocial relationships. That's where you build parasocial relationships with us, or hate watch us. We're much more offensive.
80% hate watchers. Yeah,
that's where I get most of my Collins content.
We'll link to both in the show notes. I really appreciate you guys coming back. This was a lot of fun and really thought provoking. I appreciate it.
Really good conversation. Yeah, have a great weekend, guys.
Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Stephen, welcome back.
Thanks, Enosh. How you doing?
I am doing A-okay. How about yourself?
Pretty solid too. I should have segued that into what I wanted to plug immediately, which was Ask Who. Let me find the actual name of the podcast here, because
Ask Who Casts AI, I believe.
So that's the Patreon page. AI Article Readings is the podcast I had to search for.
Oh, really? I go to askwhocastsai.substack.com, and that's where I subscribed.
Oh, see, in my podcatcher, I had just went to go add new, and I put in Ask Who, and this came up. So I wanted to plug AI article readings because it's great. I'm listening to Zvi's reaction to the episode we just did with Matt, the content of that paper.
Wait, I'm sorry, what? His reaction to our episode?
No, sorry, his reaction to the thing that we talked about.
To the paper.
Right.
Okay, yes, yeah.
But I also listened to a fun post. It was an extrapolation of what you and I talked about on the Fallout series about your dissension with like the notion of ascribing too much to luck in one's life. That was a lot of fun. So,
yeah, I'm very flattered that Ask Who has started doing a fair bit of my personal blog in audio readings. He's done like my luck series and my review of the Pragmatist Guide to Crafting Religion. You did a Baze Blast with him. It's really good. I really like this. At one point, I read a really good Reddit post about a guy who accidentally, as a kid, organized a student protest against a teacher who, I mean, that wasn't literally what he did, but like the teacher was so bad and he was so autistic that he was just like, I ain't going to class anymore. I don't have to. I'm just going to stay here. And, you know, if people would come and be like, you should get to class. And he would listen to them and be respectful, nod along and smile. And afterwards, he'd be like, no, thanks. I'm good right here.
Kid knows what's up.
Yeah. And it turned into a whole thing. And all the other kids in his class were like, yeah, this is the worst teacher ever. We're going to stay here. And it's a fascinating story about how the administration of the school responded. And eventually the teacher got removed. But I was like, this is just such a good post. Can you like make an audio version of it? He was like, yeah, sure. Here you go. And so now there's an audio version of it, which anyone can listen to. He does a lot of Zvi's super long AI posts, which, as I said to Zvi when we interviewed him, like I don't read all of them because they're just so long. But now I listen to basically all of them because listening is much easier than reading. So, I mean, Matt, thanks to Ask Who. And this is a great thing.
Yeah, it's a game changer. I definitely consume more Zvi than I did otherwise, and audio has so many benefits. So yeah, ask who
Yeah.
you fucking rock, and we'll continue to enjoy the content you put out and continue to shill for it. So thanks again.
Yeah. Well, I have 2 bits of feedback before the Lesser Wrong posts if you want to hit them real fast.
Sure.
All right. The first one isn't really feedback in so much as it's a correction. Matt, who we were just talking about that we had on the last episode, says, I wanted to mention that every time I say encoding, I maybe should have said embedding. These 2 things are not quite the same, but you can use the same interpretability techniques on both, and I kind of think of them interchangeably. Not all transformers have an explicit encoder-decoder architecture, but regardless, they just pick a certain layer and treat that as an encoding, and this is called an embedding. So I don't know the details behind most of these words right now, but the technically correct is the best form of correct, so he is helping us become more technically correct. For anyone who is listening to the episode and being like, hey, that was technically incorrect. He's like, yeah, okay, it was, but here's the correction.
Well, I'm glad he clarified. I certainly didn't know enough to call him out on it, but I'm sure someone will appreciate the clarification.
Yeah. All right, and the final bit of feedback is, again, not really feedback in so much as it is me saying that when we said that everyone should unsubscribe from OpenAI, ChatGPT, and move over to Claude. Well, I have now done that. I have unsubscribed from GPT. This is actually not that big a deal because the free version is really good now, and I was doing it in large part because I don't use it as much, and I'm about to be traveling for 3 weeks, and I just didn't need to keep paying the money. So it's not really that big a deal. It wasn't really a principled stance that I did it, but on the other hand, I did actually technically do it. So everybody else, be like me and unsubscribe from GPT and use Claude instead, because we would like some safety in our AI.
I like it. I'm currently still subscribed because I'm putting together a presentation for work comparing Claude versus ChatGPT. But once that's done, I mean, GPT has some perks that Claude doesn't, but honestly, I think Claude confabulates less and like is overall more reliable. But I'll save all that for a longer deep dive.
Once you're done with the presentation, you can upload it here.
Totally.
Can Claude do image generation?
No, as far as I know. Let me see.
Okay, that's a bummer because GPT's DALL-E image generation is actually pretty darn good.
Yeah, no DALL-E integration, but maybe soon. We'll see.
Okay. Well, did we have anything else before we moved on to talking about the Guild of the Rose?
No, let's do it.
We've been doing a bunch of in real life Guild of the Rose meetups lately, as was talked about in the last episode. The last one we did was
disaster
preparedness. Yeah, it was really good. It's based off of one of the courses that they have, and I learned quite a few things. If you were not one of those people who's already read about and thought about disaster preparedness for a while, it's a darn good course. You never know when something could happen, because there's always a chance that something could happen. A hurricane could strike, or if you're not in a hurricane area, there could be a solar flare that knocks out the power grid in your place for several weeks, which is literally a disaster. You want to not be a burden on the rest of society when something like this is happening. And then on top of that, you can start helping other people. So anyways, what I'm saying is it's a great course. You can take this course in the Guild of the Rose. And while you're doing that, you get sorted into a cohort with other people that you will get to know and form bonds with over the course of months or even years, depending on how long you stay along. And it's great.
You said all really well.
Okay. All that is in the service of upping your rationality game as well.
Check out the link in the description and or guildoftheRose.org.
Hell yes. Thank you guys for providing this for everybody and for us. Okay.
Let's move on to the Less Wrong posts.
Awesome.
So first one up is humanism a religion substitute?
Stephen, I feel like we could do an entire episode about this kind of thing, but let's go ahead and not do a whole episode and just talk about the post instead.
Yeah, let's briefly summarize this and put that on the back burner for a deep dive, because I think that trying to be succinct about it, I think the main difference will be like that he's talking about something slightly different than the thing that you've been pushing for the last couple of years.
I think so.
They have some overlap. But
definitely.
And I think a lot of people could levy these same criticisms at what you're doing, but I think your project is actually different.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what he's talking about. So he starts off, suppose you were to put me into an fMRI scanner and take a movie of my brain's activity levels while I watched a space shuttle launch. The fMRI might, maybe not, resemble the fMRI of a devout Christian watching a nativity scene. Should an experimenter obtain this result, there's a lot of people out there, both Christians and some atheists, who would gloat, haha, space travel is your religion.
Oh.
Yep. His rebuttal to their imagined response is already ready. He says, but that's drawing the wrong category boundary. It's like saying that because some people once tried to fly by irrational means, no one should ever enjoy looking out of an airplane window on the clouds below. I like that.
Yeah. I think a large part of that feeling of awe and wonder when you are watching a space shuttle launch is I see right now, I'm slightly annoyed at Wes because I hear him yelling at me in his
Not
voice.
to use
Don't
the
use
word
the word
spiritual.
spiritual. Yeah.
I
but
heard you
Wes,
trying to use it.
yeah, but it's literally a spiritual experience. That is what the word means.
This
And
is what the word means to you, and that's legit.
the main problem here, I think, is that a lot of people, this is also written in the New Atheism Wars days, there are people who conflated spiritual experiences with religion. And while they are very linked, because I think religion uses spiritual experiences, and honestly, that may be why spiritual experiences are a universal in the human species, or almost universal. It allowed there to be this hook in our psychology that religion could use, and therefore it spread. They're two different things. And so if someone said, haha, space travel is your religion, they're confusing religion and spiritual experiences, and they're not the same thing. That is a thing that would now annoy me, because I would say you don't understand the difference between these two things, and you can't conflate them like that.
And that distinction has been articulated, even within like the New Atheist community for decades, but I don't think it's received enough attention. I mean, there's a difference between, a transcendent experience, whether it's, brought on by watching a space shuttle or taking drugs or whatever, and I was going to say, and, somebody having a really thoughtful and productive prayer session or something, right? But they're actually really, really similar. It's just one involves something that they, the person experiencing the thing hinging the supernatural component to it, whereas another one doesn't. And so you suck out all the supernaturalism, and there's still a lot there. The best parts.
Yeah.
I had to grab this because, I'll read it and then explain. Yudkowsky goes on, he says, now, to be fair to the religionists, this is not just a gloating assumption. There are atheists who have religion-shaped holes in their minds. I've seen attempts to substitute atheism or even transhumanism for a religion. The result is invariably awful. Utterly awful. Absolutely, objectively awful. Is he calling you out, Inyash?
I think he's trying. I haven't actually tried to make a religion yet. I agree with him that the results so far seem to be pretty bad in a large variety of ways. Some of them just in the terms of that they failed, and some of them in that they go over the edge and become like weird culty things that take over people's lives in a bad way, like Scientology. But I don't think it has to be this way. I don't know, maybe. Like the Rational Solstice has been around for 14 years now. So started, I think, maybe the same year he wrote this or the year after. And they've been experimenting with this sort of atheism religion thing. And it works to some degree. I think it still needs more work to get there. I think this is where I could get into an entire episode of content.
Do you want to just leave it at that and we'll leave it as a cliffhanger, or do you want to...
Yeah, I should probably just leave it at that, because I'm trying to think of like, how can I say more on this without going into like an hour of stuff? What I'm trying to say is that religion can be incredibly useful, and you don't have to have a religion-shaped hole in your mind in order to want the benefits that you can get from religion. And also, wanting transcendent, spiritual, connective experiences is not the same thing as having a religion-shaped hole. And I think it is conceding a lot to the religionists to say that they're the same thing. Almost all humans have some desire for experiences like that and connection with other humans. And that doesn't mean they have a religion-shaped hole. It just means that they're normal, psychologically healthy humans. A religion claiming that that's a religion-shaped hole is a lot like them saying that if you have morality, then that proves that you are reliant upon religion.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And I think Yudkowsky agrees with you on the first point there, too. I mean,
yeah,
it's just a matter of fact that people can be moved deeply to the point of tears or life-changing decisions based off of experiences that they have without any supernaturalism involved.
I do wonder how he feels about these things nowadays because, he goes to the rationalist solstices. I'm curious about his emotional connection to them, what he thinks of them, and the fact is that they are an attempt to recreate religious ritual. They use the term ritual often in describing them. Raymond Arnold, who started the first ones, has said this is literally based on my childhood religion that I was grown up in. I think there was some value in it, and we can take that value and bring it to the rationalist community. I've spoken with other people who run the solstice and their rituals in their communities. Most of them try to add their own flavor of bringing back some part of their childhood religion to it. But that doesn't mean that there's a religion-shaped hole necessarily. It just means that they can see a thing of value, much like if we were to get rid of all government, we would still probably want some things that government does and find a way to incorporate them.
I like that analogy too.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, you guys can't hate these things, otherwise you wouldn't go to them, right? So
yeah.
I think that they're fulfilling a different purpose, but let's avoid diving too deep into it, and maybe we can just push through the post here. But I do want to talk about this at length at some point.
Okay. I pulled out a thing that he said. If a rocket launch is what it takes to give me a feeling of aesthetic transcendence, I do not see this as a substitute for religion. I agree with him. Again, I guess that's what I've just been saying the past 10 minutes. But I also think that that's the problem, actually. They never could be a substitute for religion because they're not the same kind of thing. And the people who try to use just having these spiritual experiences as a substitute for religion are failing, because it's not a substitute for religion. It is an experience, and a religion is something else entirely.
Yep.
Well, he says that attempts to recreate religion by the literal example he gives is by creating hymns that are not religious in nature. He says anti-religious hymns to how there are no God, but he says the results will, without exception, suck. Why? Because they're being imitative, because they have no motivation for writing the hymn except a vague feeling that since churches have hymns, they ought to have one too.
That's the kind of trap I imagine people falling into if we're like, oh, let's make a religion. And it's like, so
Yes.
we have to write songs and meet at the same time every week and eat the same, have a snack at the same, or whatever parts of the rituals you want to suck out of various religions or whatever. It would just feel imitative.
Yeah. I do think this is one of the major problems with the solstices as we are practicing them right now, is that they are fairly imitative. That is kind of intentional by the people who designed them, because the things they experienced when they were children worked. But I agree with Eliezer here that they are missing a vital component.
And I think that there's a difference if you're imitating something, but that's what you're doing, and that like this isn't the real thing. That self-awareness brings a certain kind of balm to how shitty it could be, right? Like I think the solstices are better than they would be otherwise, because this imitation is done with open eyes and intention. It's not just like, oh, I'm kind of just imitating this thing from childhood, and again, it's not the hymn to why God doesn't exist or something, right? So I think that it allays a lot of that suckiness by having that self-awareness.
And I just want to reiterate, I know I'm kind of shitting on the solstices here a bit, and I don't want to do that, because they are moving and good experiences. They're
not religious experiences for you.
Right. The attempt to use humanism or transhumanism as their core doesn't work for me, and maybe that's just for me personally, and maybe for other people it does work, but
I wouldn't want to make those things into religions anyway.
Well, I do want to reiterate that they're actually really good rituals, and I've literally cried at one of them. It was so good. I've certainly felt well, let me take that back. I've cried at two of them. They're very memorable. They're very emotionally moving. I think they're good things, and I'm glad we have them, and I'm glad we're continuing to experiment and make these more what we want. Like, there's, in any nascent movement, there's going to be a lot of experimenting and figuring out how to make this work. There is no, as far as I know, science of profundity and religious experience yet, especially in a world where we know that there is no magic and there are no gods. So what do? I don't know. We're figuring it out. And these people have found out some very good and powerful things, and I really recommend the experience. But I think there's something that isn't quite there. And I think, honestly, one really good thing we could find out from the post-rats is how they managed to so consistently get strong spiritual religious vibes working through their stuff despite not having a God belief.
Sounds worth investigating. Just throwing this out there, one thing that religions have that are awesome and should be mimicked for anything trying to copy that project is relics.
Yes.
Relics are tight.
They are. Like, one of the things I mentioned is that one of the cool things about cathedrals is they always have dead people inside them, like literal people who have died. The relics are similar to that. And Jesus, as transhumanists, we have a number of relics that we could have, right?
I don't see why not. Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking of the demon core, but on the other hand, maybe we don't want something that'll kill everybody around with lethal radiation if you mishandle it. But what sort of relic are you thinking of?
I hadn't thought of any yet. I mean, part of the profundity of relics is their ancientness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's no fun to have a relic that we just made this year, but cryopreserved mouse or something, like if you're going to a transhumanist religious ceremony kind of thing, that's just the first thing that pops into mind. But whatever it is, maybe find, for example, Roger Bacon's diary, like that would be the relic to pass around. And, people could lie about, oh yes, this is a page from his actual diary. And the whole
Yeah.
enterprise of faked relics would have to be a staple of this as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that shards of the cross that Jesus hung on, if you were to combine all the ones that people sold over the years, would make many houses.
Yes. Maybe if Eliezer has jolted down some notes or even wrote some drafts of methods of rationality on paper, and those are still existent somewhere, those could be intro relics.
Yeah. Well, we'll put that in the back burner. His second point here, this is where I think he gets into the important difference between imitation and doing it properly, is that if we had never made the original mistake, the mistake of inventing religions or supernaturalism or whatever you want to, if you want to keep religions around, would this song, this art, this ritual, this way of thinking still make sense? And I think that's a great litmus test. If humanity had never made the original mistake, there'd be no hymns to the non-existence of God, but there'd still be marriages. There'd be the notion of an atheistic marriage ceremony makes perfect sense. There'd still be community bondings and stuff like that. So,
and lots of atheists still get married. So, as proof.
Yeah.
He says in a human world where religion never had existed, there would still be people who got tears in their eyes watching a space shuttle launch.
It's hard to see how that couldn't be true.
Yeah. Although I also think that, again, these two facts are related. And if there had never been religions, then spirituality wouldn't have been as strongly selected for.
All right, I'm looking forward to this long conversation.
Okay. He says, a good atheistic hymn is simply a song about anything worth singing about that doesn't happen to be religious. And I really wanted to pull this out and give it a 100% react because I have a friend who goes to a bar in New York when she's there where they all gather around a piano and sing show tunes at the top of their lungs. And she loves it, and she calls it her church because that is where she has these experiences. And I have other things that I think of as my church. They don't have to involve a belief in a God. They can be based purely on physical things. So, yeah, there is so many things that you can find to give you this that are not based on a ridiculous belief in some sort of creative personality that exists outside of space-time and cares about what you do personally.
Yeah. And just so actually I get an excuse to correct my pronunciation of the word Spinozing. I was saying Spinoza-ing before. I think that the only small nitpick I would have with that is that if you told somebody, I'm going to go to church, they have a very specific idea of what you're saying. They don't imagine you're going to a bar to sing show tunes.
Right. I mean, that's why you would clarify if you were saying that.
Right. This label already has a handle on it, right?
Right. If you were talking to someone who didn't know that that your use is different, you should clarify. But also, if there became a large enough community that there were people who literally got together and sung show tunes around a piano as part of their spiritual worship, then you could legitimately call that church and not have to clarify anymore because there's an actual sect that does that. Like when Quakers go to church, they sit around in an empty room in silence for 1 to 2 hours, and sometimes people are moved to speak. And that's not what I think of as church either, but that's literally their church. So they usually don't clarify unless people ask, like, what are the details of how you worship?
That's a good point. I just, it's one of those things that I think terms like church and religion and whatnot still, I think, bristle me in a way that they don't you. Which is interesting because you
Yeah.
have much more damaging religious upbringing than I did. I think that I disliked a lot of the equivocation in the arguments that I saw back in those days, and this feels like something that would play into that. But that doesn't make it wrong. It's just it's my association with it.
Up until 3 or 4 years ago, I had just as strong of that bristly reaction, to the point where, I wouldn't go to the solstice rituals. There was an attempt to have one here in Denver, I don't know, a decade ago, 8 years ago. And I was like, okay, that's cool, but I'm not going to go. It was just way too religious for me. And I don't know exactly what has gotten me past that. Maybe it's just been enough time away from that and from the worst aspects of it that now I'm like, okay, I can see the good parts, and I can try to get the good parts without all the bad parts.
I can dig it. Plus, you had some transcendent experiences.
That's true. I've taken LSD since then. I've had some amazing experiences in foreign countries, not on LSD, just trying to explore my own inner shit. So,
well, you wrote a great post on your blog about an experience you had in an old church, or I guess a cathedral, and so I think that it made that connection kind of inescapable for the moment. So I think I can totally dig that.
Yeah, I think that was kind of when it started, when I went to England and was literally being led around by this tiny god in my pocket, like we talked about before. And I was like, how is this possible? And everything just started tumbling down then.
Yeah, well, trying to think of an analogy about building something out of broken down stuff, but it's not coming to me.
I see what you're gesturing at.
Great.
Cool.
Well, consider it gestured. Let's see. He says, reverse stupidity is not intelligence. If humanity had never made the original mistake, no one would be trying to avoid things that vaguely resembled religion. Believe accurately, then feel accordingly. Maybe that's what you've gotten over.
I think that's probably why I pulled that quote out, because exactly that.
Yeah.
I spent most of my life trying to avoid those things, and now I'm not anymore.
And I think that's awesome. Some people have bad associations with the stuff that they just don't want to be reminded of, and that's legit too. But you're like, what? I'm not going to let those people ruin this thing for me. I'm going to still have these cool experiences.
I was just thinking, man, I really hope I'm not fucking myself over, my brain and my emotional system and all that, by doing this. I realize I'm playing with fire.
As long as you're careful, playing with fire is awesome.
Aw, that's a damn good point. Thank you.
Have you ever actually played with fire?
Depends on what you mean. I think yes, as the short answer. I've actually made that little garage homemade napalm thing you could make as a kid.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Just be careful.
Yeah. Right.
And don't play with fire, kids. But if you do, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, make sure you have sand around. A lot of it.
All right. Well, he closes this one off by saying that the choice between God and humanity is not just a choice of drugs. Above all, humanity actually exists.
Yeah, it's a good line.
Yeah.
He has great bangers, man.
And it doesn't at all lead us smoothly into the next less wrong post here, scarcity.
This post feels like it's mainly just a setup for the upcoming posts. So
it is,
it's pretty short.
He pulls a lot of quotes out of Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, Science, and Practice, which I also have owned several copies of, and now just give away PDFs because I got sick of buying them.
I believe I have a copy that you gave me, and I swear to God, I'm actually going to read it sometime in the very near future.
It's a great skim. It's
short.
It's actually engaging, yeah, and it's fun. It asks you. I was going to say it's a great skim, but it's more just you can read it at skim speed and still take everything in.
Awesome.
It asks you to do exercises at the end of each chapter to make sure you got the concept, and I think those are actually valuable. And it is a quick read, and it's a great self-defense book.
Nice.
I'm no longer. I have explicit policies now that I use whenever the situation is appropriate to just completely avoid being taken in by hucksters. For whatever reason, the community I live in is a relatively new construction, and we still get people coming to the door all the time about, hey, we want to buy, home security. How about this exterminator service or whatever? Mm-hmm. And I always say, no, I'm not going to sign anything right now. But if you have a website, I can check it out. Well, the deal only lasts until, since we'll already be out here, it's the end of the day or something. I'm like, you know what? Then no. And I just tell them I don't sign things under time pressure like that. Mm-hmm. That is a very common tactic, and it is in Chapter 6, Scarcity. If I remember correctly, this is Chapter 6.
Excellent.
It is a very common tactic. But scarcity, we should probably define, as the term is used in social psychology, is when things become more desirable when they appear less obtainable.
It's neat that they called it scarcity, I guess. As always, having the same word for many things can sometimes be confusing, but if they can use the word scarcity, then gosh darn it, other people can use the word spirituality.
What do you use scarcity to mean? Like an actual lack of resources?
Yes.
I see. Yeah, that does seem like an important difference. I guess you might call it psychological scarcity, but that's too many syllables.
I mean, basically, once you know, you're like, oh, okay, now I know how you're using the term. It's fine.
Hey, that's a point against the argument from Spinozing. So
it captures the emotion that word is pointing at in both cases. That's the important part. It depends on what you want words to do, but if you're using words to point to an emotion, this is the correct word for both those cases. He also says, similarly, information that appears forbidden or secret seems more important and trustworthy.
Yeah, and throughout the post, he's citing examples of various cases like this. There's a short one. Actually, I wonder some of these experiments are at this point almost 50 years old. I wonder if they replicate, just even at all. But this one was actually real. So buyers for supermarkets told by a supplier that beef was in scarce supply gave orders for twice as much beef as buyers told it would be readily available. Buyers that told that beef was in scarce supply and, furthermore, that information about the scarcity was itself scarce, the shortage was not general knowledge, ordered 6 times as much beef.
That's kind of crazy. And I understand, like, oh shit, it's scarce. All right, I got to stock up right now. But then they're told, but nobody else knows it's scarce. Don't tell anyone. They're like, okay, give me 6 times as more. I'm like, what? Why? Just because the information is scarce, does that change your actions?
The first part actually makes sense, right?
Yes.
You're like, okay, you mean I won't be able to order it next week? Then yeah, I'll order twice as much this week, sure. But the fact that the knowledge of the scarcity is itself scarce, you'd think, oh, well, that means that no one else is going to stockpile. That means I don't have to extra stockpile. You would think they'd buy more if they believed everyone around them knew that it was scarce too. Yeah. Like we saw with people hoarding toilet paper for some goddamn reason during the plague.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, of all the things, that's like not in the top 10 of my survival supplies,
No.
But it was like the one thing that was so hard to find for weeks. Oh, man.
And also because there's so many substitutes. Like they're inferior substitutes, but you can, in a pinch, use paper towels or tissue Kleenex or wet wipes. Like there's a number of other things.
Removable shower handle,
Removable shower handle?
What am I trying to say? My shower's on I
see. Use it like as a bidet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like it's not exactly a substitute for the real thing, but it's just like again, why was this the thing people fixed to? The Purell I understood, right?
Yeah.
Toilet paper, not so much.
I mean, because butt stuff always gains attention.
I guess so. But yeah, the psychological reactance is what they would term that response as. When you tell people they can't do something, they'll just try even harder. There was that old joke about Obama being a great gun salesman. I think they say this about every time a Democrat is in office, but if there's any mention of like, well, maybe we could make it slightly harder to acquire some kind of firearm, then everyone's like, oh my God, and go stockpile ammo and whatever, right? Even though the 4,000 bullets you already have is probably going to be plenty to last you the rest of your life.
Oh, I don't know. 4,000 bullets isn't that much as long as you're, continuing to keep your skills up and train. Assuming you go to the range at least once a year, and
no, for sure. I mean, you'll burn through them, but this is assuming that you'll never be able to buy any ever again. Not that it's just going to be scarce for a while,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, in a real post-world apocalypse, you get to take all the ammo of the people you kill. So,
right. So yeah, there's a bunch of examples. They're really fun to read.
So there was one example that he pulled out, and this was one from that he cites Broder 1959. I have no idea if this is, again, replicable or how stringent the science was, but here's what he found, or here's what he said. When a driver said he had liability insurance, experimental jurors awarded his victim an average of $4,000 more than if the driver said he had no insurance. If the judge afterward informed the jurors that information about insurance was inadmissible and must be ignored, jurors awarded an average of $13,000 more than if the driver had no insurance. And that seems insane.
That does seem insane.
Part of the reason I want to pull this out is because it's not clear to me why this is in the scarcity post. Is it just because they assume that the guy either has money or doesn't?
No. I mean, I think that originally that's what it is. That like, oh, if you have insurance, fine, give them extra money. Insurance money doesn't matter, which is like, Jesus, people, come on, don't be dumb. But
it's kind of not real money.
Right? I mean, it's not really real.
Well, I just as a brief aside, the car that I bought in 2020 is a 2011. And as such is by a wide margin the newest car I've ever owned. And that summer it got hail damage. And I was like, you know what? I'll pay $500 to get the hail damage fixed. And because it was an insurance claim, they billed insurance like $5,700 for repairing the hail damage. I can't believe that if I went to a body shop myself and said, "Hey, can you guys off some of the, take some of these dings out," that they charge me almost $6,000.
It's a common problem.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the whole diffusion of responsibility. Like the jurors can see the driver and be like, Jesus, $4,000 is a lot for this guy. Whereas when they can't see all the people that are covered by that insurance company and each of them paying a little bit more, to them, that's not real. So once the hurt is spread among many people, it's just like, oh yeah, let's just do more damage.
It's just dust specks.
Exactly.
If you really want to have your if this will grind your gears. When I bought Paxlovid a few months ago, a few weeks, I don't know. It was $25. The non-insured price was $1,600.
Jesus Christ.
So they charge.
I mean, for what it's worth, the insurance did not pay that much.
I guess I just wonder what that number even meant on the receipt then.
That is the beginning of the negotiating process. I get regularly notes from my insurance about like how the breakouts are of all the bills, and generally they get an 85 to 90% discount, and then they pay 90% of what's left, and I'm left with the remaining basically 1% at that point of the bill. But like, yeah, once you regularly get 90% discounts on everything, that's like when that price was never real in the first place.
I'm sure all that negotiation is very expensive and is why these companies stay in business. So
yeah,
and why they charge so much. But that's neither here nor there. So why do you think this is in the scarcity chapter?
Because the judge said that this information is inadmissible and must be ignored. It is, as Elijah says earlier, forbidden or secret, and therefore it must be more important and more trustworthy, and therefore the guy should be given even more money.
Oh God, that's disconcerting to me. I did that whole episode about my experience as a juror, and I still think about that once in a while. And there were definitely things where things weren't admissible, but they were part of someone's testimony or something. I can't be sure in retrospect if I was perfectly. I know that I couldn't update, 100% honestly as if as a robot on that, right?
Yeah.
Like once you see and hear something and you're told to ignore that, you just try to like counter update in the other direction. Hopefully we didn't totally fail at doing that, but luckily we weren't in the business of awarding punishments. It was just or awarding damages. It was just did this person do it or not? So there was less room for us to wiggle on than if we'd been given free range or the free dynamic of how much do you think this person deserves to pay this person, right?
Do you have any like thoughts about how your jury experience went in light of this?
I mean, there was a particular example because like normally during a criminal case, you're like no one's allowed to bring up the fact like the previous incidences that have nothing to do with the current case.
Right.
But there was
Which I think is stupid as hell.
I was going to let that go, but why?
Because if someone just fucked up and it's their first offense, I think I realize the jury is not supposed to care about that. The jury is just there to like, did this one incident happen or not? So, okay, hopefully the judge or someone else takes into consideration this guy is, one of the bottom 1% of humans that are responsible for almost all crime. This is his 5th time in here. We know that he did the other 4 things. He served time for those other 4 things. It's very likely he did this too. All the evidence points to yes. And
our previous punishments haven't shown to be enough of a deterrence. So yeah, let's up the punishment on this one. But yeah, you're right. That's for the judge to decide.
Yeah, but I also think that does affect how likely it is that someone is guilty. Like,
I totally agree.
If you already know that someone has been in court multiple times for other convictions, then he's one of the bottom 1% of humans that do most of the crime.
This was one of the things that was hard to like disregard as a juror was like the fact is like we're just here to see if there's enough evidence here in the courtroom to ascertain whether or not the crimes alleged happened.
Yeah.
Or whether or not we believe they did. And
it's important to have a group that can do that.
Yeah. So I think as for the specifically like the jury part of the justice system process, I think it makes sense to have that.
Yeah.
But like as a rational human, you look at they did this 10 times before. It seems like that ups the odds of them doing it this 11th time. So it was hard to kind of disregard those things, but say you're not supposed to bring up previous crimes. And so they brought this up and they brought in a police officer from years ago described a domestic dispute that was supposed to not be part of the, and it was with the same plaintiff and defendant. But that's not supposed to be admissible. The admissible part was that there, in fact, was a gun in the guy's car. And so when he told this other cop later on, "Oh, I've never had a gun. I don't like guns. I don't own a gun," or whatever. Well, here was testimony from a police officer saying, "Well, when I talked to him on this other occasion years ago, he had a gun." That part was admissible. But the rest of like, oh, so he's threatened her with a gun before. Okay, well, can't put that into the Bayesian calculation there. Okay, got it. That was the weird part.
And it's definitely Bayesian evidence.
Oh, 100%.
We just have to ignore Bayesian evidence to get good court protocols, I guess.
I think I like it more than the alternative, which would be somebody's been in some shit before, and then they get dragged in for a thing they didn't actually do. If you're allowed to just list off their previous litany of crimes, and it's like, yeah, but that was years ago and I've stopped. Well, look at all these crimes you've committed before. That's all evidence of this crime. It's like, but it's actually not, God damn it. I could totally see from the defendant's perspective how that you would want it that way. And since we're all prospective defendants, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm going to go with yeah. Emotionally, I agree with you. I don't know if that's just because that's the way I've been taught my whole life, but I'm going to go with, I really wish instead of a jury, we could have an AI.
Once those get running really well, I think, what would be cool is if you could, as a defendant, if you could elect to have an AI jury or a human jury.
Oh, awesome.
I think that would be great.
If I was innocent, I would go for the AI jury every time.
Totally. And if I was guilty, I might try to play with some humans and placate, right?
Right.
But you can't use whether they go with the AI jury or the human jury as evidence of their guilt, So
yeah,
even if an established pattern is there. Anyway, he wraps this up, like I said, in a way to lean into the next post. So
yes, he says that the really fundamental problem with desiring the unattainable is that as soon as you actually get it, it stops being attainable. If we cannot take joy in the merely available, our lives will always be frustrated, which is a great way to tie together this idea of social scarcity and the things he's been saying previously about taking joy in the merely real.
And it's a life lesson for just being for general happiness too. I mean, people always I think chase like when I get the vacation at the end of the year, or even worse, when I get the thing, whether that thing is an expensive watch or toy or something, like, oh, I'll be happy when I get that. So, well, now that I've got it, am I actually happier? And he does, I think, relay mention in this post Tim Ferriss's pointing out that his advice when planning your life: ask which ongoing experiences would make me happy rather than which possessions or status changes. Because will this toy make me happy? No, but will this whatever? Like I bought like a $15 attachment for my garage door that lets me open it with and close it with my phone, and determine from a distance if my door is opened or closed.
Nice.
That was a very good use of $15, and it wasn't like particularly fun to buy, other than like it's fun to have a new gadget. I have a whole folder of apps on my phone called gadgets, but like I've circled back from a mile away to go home and check if the garage door is closed before, right?
Yeah.
So like, is this particularly like fun thing? No, but did it add life value? Hell yeah, it did. Definitely paid its worth. Probably already just in gas money.
I'm glad you have that.
Yeah, the app is called My Q, and I have no idea why, but none of this is good audio. So,
all right. So for next time, we are going to read "To Spread Science, Keep It Secret" and "Initiation Ceremony."
Ooh, I think I remember that one.
I think I do too.
Yeah, and it's because it's memorable. This will be fun. I'm looking forward to these.
Yeah.
All right.
And finally, before we go, we have to, as always, thank one of our patrons. This week, we would like to thank Rick-Tick.
Rick-Tick, our hero.
Yeah. Rick-Tick, thank you for your support. You help us keep going, and we really just appreciate seeing those names like pop up saying, hey, a new person is supporting you. It's like, hey, all right, that feels great. Somebody likes what we do enough to help us out this way.
It really does make a huge difference. We appreciate it. So yeah, there's Patreon, which we link to in the show notes. There's also Substack as of recently, where all of our shows get cross-posted. And if you don't like Patreon for the numerous good reasons there are to not like Patreon, then check out the Substack too.
Do you think we should? Yeah, we should totally start thinking the Substackers once we run through all our Patreon supporters, right?
100%.
I kind of assume Substackers might want more privacy than patrons. Yeah, Substack subscription information, I don't think is open by default.
Okay.
How about this? If you're a Substack subscriber, we will not by default say your name on here because, I don't know, maybe you want more privacy than what Patreon offers. But we will slowly contact all our Substack supporters and ask them if they are okay with being identified. Because if you are, then we'll give you a shout out and a thanks. And if not, then we will just pretend your name never showed up.
I think that's important to clarify because if someone might be hesitant to support on Substack, lest we read their name out loud. So yeah, that won't happen without explicit consent.
Alrighty, well, thank you for joining me, Stephen, for doing this thing every few weeks like we do.
I appreciate it too. Thanks, man.
All right, bye.
Later.